the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome. Yeah, you know what that song means. Welcome in. I am Chris Harris, convenient because this is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the little podcast that could. If you're not subscribed, I hope you'll take a minute and do so. You know, people sometimes ask us what's the best way to support the podcast so we can continue to exist like the indie that we are. And honestly, that's it. Subscribing so that you download every day. That's the best way. All right. So anyway, I was watching some Monday Night Football, and on the TV appeared some Cardinal defensive back, strapping young fella with his helmet off. Don't actually know who it was, but my viewing companion said, "Hey, what's that?" And it was something behind his ear, and my viewing companion said, "Is that a speaker in his ear? Is that some sort of microphone or communication device?" And I didn't see it at first because I was looking away, but then I looked, and it was his mouthpiece, kind of, like curled behind his ear. And I was about to say, "It's his mouthpiece." And then the player in question removed the item from behind his ear and put it in his mouth. And the viewing companion, it did not go over well. I watched the rest of the game solo. The lesson: don't put your mouthpiece behind your ear.
Today's kickoff.
So today's show will feature the remainder of our game film review from Week 7. Make sure you listen to Monday's podcast for the rest of the film. Today we'll touch on that Monday night game, Ravens-Cardinals, and then we'll do Vikings-Lions, Tampa-Washington, Raiders-Chargers, Texans-Dolphins, Bills-Jags, and Browns-Rams. You'll get a little fantasy knowledge, hopefully, from our review of each of those games. We'll squeeze another listener mixtape in there somewhere. And then Sig Bloom from Football Guys will join me, and we'll talk about the waiver wire for Week 8. And this is a week where there are actually some guys worth adding. We have a new sponsor today, and I'm excited because they've got a product I use. It's Harry's. They've completely taken the expense and hassle out of buying razor blades. Guys, seriously, buying razor blades at the supermarket or the pharmacy is ridiculous. Sometimes they're locked up in a little plastic box, and I'm always like, okay, it's how much for 5 razor blades? Harry's is the solution to all that. I'm not kidding. I use the Harry's razor, which is a lovely, solid object in your hand. I use the Winston set. It's a better shave than you get from store-bought blades, and it's cheaper. You can get a starter set from Harry's for just $10, and that includes a razor, 3 blades, and shaving cream. You buy so many other things you need online. Why are you still buying razors in a store? Say goodbye to choosing between expensive brands or cheap disposables and say hello to Harry's. High-quality blades at a price you'll love. Go to harrys.com right now and enter offer code Harris at checkout to get $5 off your first purchase. Yup. Get a month's worth of shaving for just $10 with offer code Harris at checkout. That's harrys.com, offer code Harris. Well, Steve Smith didn't get in the end zone Monday. He did get followed around some by Patrick Peterson, but he also got 9 targets and 5 catches and wound up with 78 yards. Once again, putting another nail in the coffin of the idea that we don't start receivers because of defensive backs. The NFL's just different now. It's too spread out, too many formations, too much zone for teams that even like to play man a lot. Don't outthink yourself. The whole Revis Island thing it seems recent, but it's a byproduct of a bygone era. Especially when it's someone like Smith. I mean, Smith is on a team with no other consistent outside receivers. You got to keep using them no matter what. Chris Johnson had a terrific first series. That touchdown run, awesome balance, took a big hit, stayed on his feet. The acceleration is still there. But if you haven't seen the Cardinals play much, I think you understand what I mean about Chris Johnson's game overall when you watched everything that came after that first series. If they're isn't something for him, right at the snap to barrel through. That's kind of just it. His big gain late in the game, I guess we'll agree to disagree. I thought he should have been ruled down. I certainly accept it's a judgment call, but in my experience watching these games, the refs usually err on the side of not letting defenders crush a runner who's like lying on top of another defender. Anyway, I kind of think some tainted yards there. But I will say, if you didn't watch the game, don't be fooled by Andre Ellington's stat line. He really barely played until pretty late in the fourth quarter, and David Johnson was used sparingly too after he blew a blitz pickup. The man who was most in doubt, the topic of most conversation going into this game, was John Brown, a.k.a. Double Hammy, a.k.a. Smoked Ham. He looked fast, from the very beginning. Electrically fast. Is that a thing? Electrically fast? So that, it was a relief if you started him. But if you didn't, I understand it, because how many times have we seen guys not at full speed or, re-injure themselves? The Cousin Josh philosophy is to avoid risk, and I get it. I think it's a viable way of looking at it. Anyway, Brown got several chunk plays early, a short touchdown late. Michael Floyd got a red zone touchdown. It was actually Larry Fitzgerald who was left out in the cold a little bit. And, we've been telling you this for probably the better part of a month, but for as good as Fitz has been, you can gradually see the pass offense going more and more through Brown. And I love that little guy. We're also brought to you by DraftKings.com. Listen, it was another really fun week at DraftKings, a week where I did pretty well with my kind of obvious backfield of Todd Gurley and Lamar Miller. I say they were kind of obvious because basically the challenge every week is to evaluate every player's matchup and assess the salary cap price he's been given. In the case of Gurley and Miller, you heard Craig Clark and me talk about those guys and how inexpensive they were relative to their upside for Week 7, and it worked out well. You love your fantasy league's draft day like it's the most fun day of the year in your league. And when we play at DraftKings, we're using similar muscles, and it's a similar challenge and also really fun, except you don't have to wait all year to find out how you did. So, hey, if you're an Arian Foster owner, a Jamaal Charles owner, if your hopes in your commissioner-style league are fading, try DraftKings. Trust me, you don't have to make huge investments. Usually I play for like $5, but you get that same cool feeling of fun drafting players, and DraftKings will give you a free contest to try it out when you enter my promo code Harris. So try it. Go to DraftKings.com and use promo code Harris.
Game Film Rewind.
Let's talk Vikings-Lions. Listener CJ on Twitter at CJWhyNot suggests that the little podcasted could official nickname for Stephon Diggs should be No Diggity. So there it is. No Diggity. He was terrific again. For his touchdown, he fooled the defense with an out and up. Rasheed Mathis surprise, and Glover Quinn messing up on a coverage and leaving No Diggity wide open. But that catch, wow. That's a great catch, laid out. Awesome stuff. We recommended Diggs. I think he was my number 2 waiver ad last week, so it was never about me not wanting to add him. But I admit I was a little reticent to start him in Week 7. To understand why, go back to yesterday's show, look at Kristen Michael. I know, the Vikings leaked that Diggs had bypassed Chris Johnson, just like the Cowboys leaked that Michael would be the starting running back. Kind of a matter of policy for me, when I can make myself stick to the policy. See it, believe it, otherwise beware. So if you sat Diggs on my say-so this week, I do apologize. And if you sat Michael, you're welcome. So now we are where we are with No Diggity. We don't need to worry about Charles Johnson, and Diggs is a very solid fantasy factor. Now, Mike Wallace was a factor here too. The numbers don't look good, but he drew a long penalty on illegal contact, where without the contact it was a touchdown. Their past 3 games, No Diggity has 27 targets, and Wallace has 23. I agree, between the two of them, Diggs should be rated higher right now. But, I don't think I drop Wallace. I think he'll have some good games, especially in a 12-team league or deeper. I still have some hope for him. Adrian Peterson is awesome, an incredible specimen. As an athlete, anyway. And so, you're happy with him as your first rounder. But could the guy please get in from the goal line? Stuffed 3 times from inside the 3 in this game. So far this year, Adrian Peterson has 11 carries from inside the 5. On those 11 carries, 1 touchdown. Wow. Clearly this is about the line getting enough push because AP's a stud, but that is frustrating. Lions-wise, Joik Bell actually started. First play was a short pass over the middle to him. Abdullah got the next carry. Then Riddick got the next carry. Then Abdullah with a catch. Riddick with a catch, and he almost scores. And that was the pattern the rest of the day. Each guy had some legit nice moments, but, probably not enough to bypass any of the rest of them. And the way it worked out, by the game's end, Riddick had 28 snaps. Abdullah had 11 and Bell had 10. But, you do need to realize a lot of Riddicks were in hurry-up garbage mode at the very end. Not only that, but get this, in a crucial spot on the goal line at the end of the game, none of these guys got a carry. George Wynn got one, and Michael Burton got one. Neither converted, of course. It was nice to see Joik looking healthier, but definitely it wasn't good enough. And that Lions line really seems to want Matthew Stafford to get killed. Eric Ebron's long catch and run, nice stuff, but, the result of a totally blown coverage, but we'll take the red zone touchdown. Ebron was my sleeper tight end this summer. He deserves to be in that tight end middle class, the outer reaches of the top 10 at his position. Tampa, Washington. That was a clinically insane game. Let's talk about Washington's backfield. Matt Jones played 43 snaps, and Alfred Morris played 10 snaps. Was that the plan coming in? I will contend that it's pretty much impossible to say. In the first quarter, Morris played 6 snaps and Jones played 2. And then by the middle of the second quarter, it was 28-0 Tampa. And Alfred Morris just isn't going to play in those situations. In the second half, it was 28-1 for Jones. And as far as I know, Morris wasn't hurt. He's just not playing in massive catch-up mode. And if and when Chris Thompson is back, and, I think the assumption is that it's not going to be that long, Jones is going to lose a lot of those snaps, and we're going to be right back to being a 3-headed monster. And I do think the thing you have to ask yourself is, was Jones any good in a game where he probably saw the most snaps he'll see all year? Nope. He was not. A drop on a 3rd and 1 in the first quarter. There was a second quarter run, I think it was from the Tampa 34, where he gets the edge and all he has to do is sort of flash some speed and he's gone. Looked like he was stuck in the mud. I think the idea that Alfred Morris is somehow cooked at age 26 that's patently dumb. Don't take the cheese week to week here until a pattern starts to develop. And anyway, Washington is off in week 8. Obviously, I, as the head of the Muscle Hamster fan club, was happy to see another good one from Doug Martin. But I have to admit, this largely may have been Tampa just manhandling that Washington defensive line, which was really undermanned. Because Charles Sims was a beast in limited action too, not getting tackled and bullying through that defense. And also, Sims had a 43-yard run called back by holding. But listen, we don't complain about Martin playing like this, right? He didn't score, but he was slippery, he was powerful. The Ray Rice comparisons just seemed very apt with him. He makes that big run at the end of the game. Will there be weeks where Tampa can't run? Yep. If someone wants to pay you a mint for Doug Martin as though he's a top 5 running back, I'd probably do it. I would say, though, Tampa, too stupid to win games. They're up 24-7 in the third quarter. Washington is 3rd and 1 at midfield. Tampa can't get organized, has to call a timeout. And then on back-to-back plays, they rough the passer. Back-to-back plays. I kid you not. The first one also happened to be a long completion, so I guess the Bucs thought, hey, that roughing the passer penalty didn't take and didn't count. I guess we should rough him again. Washington scores in the next play, pulls a surprise onside kick. Lovie Smith seems like a nice dude. I'll leave it at that. Seems like a nice dude. Mike Evans may have benefited from Vincent Jackson leaving in the third quarter with a knee injury, and his day was almost bigger, but for an offensive interference in the end zone. So now my Twitter feed, at Harris Football, will fill with, "Can I trust Mike Evans?" tweets. And of course the answer is no, you can't trust him, but you can definitely start him. The thing to do with Evans is force yourself to remember this game after he gives you 2 terrible games. Even if Mike Evans stays healthy and gets more consistent, and that's a big if, his quarterback is Jameis Winston. He's a kid, and he's erratic, and there will be fallow times.
Eye roll.
Let's move on and see if we can learn some stuff from a couple of blowouts. First, Raiders-Chargers. I mentioned it yesterday. Phillip Rivers was dog meat in this game. A dumb throw into coverage on his first drive that caroms up and gets picked. A second quarter misread or miscommunication with Keenan Allen, who runs an out, while Rivers throws a back shoulder. Another pick. He should have been picked by Charles Woodson in the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. Down 37-6 in the third quarter. He ends a possession on 3rd and 5, not pulling the trigger and getting called for intentional grounding. At that moment, he was 15 for 28 for 105 yards and 2 picks. But, of course, we get 25 minutes of basura time, and he winds up with 38 completions, 336 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the box score reading world thinks, yeah, pretty good game from Phillip Rivers. But you, the little podcast that could, listener, now you have no reason to ask me why I don't have Rivers ranked in my top 100 for the rest of the year, because these games lurk, and sometimes Rivers won't be able to save himself with 700 dump-offs to Danny Woodhead. I'm not telling you that you're a bad person for taking advantage of this game and having started Rivers and winning your fantasy game. I'm just saying good luck trusting Phillip Rivers. Melvin Gordon note. We can look back and chuckle at all the Sunday morning reports saying, oh, Melvin Gordon expected to be inactive because of a bad ankle. Uh-huh. Well, actually Gordon was active, and this was not an ankle thing. This was clearly a benching related to his fumbling. Kid, sit down. He came in, he played in the third quarter, and it was a blowout, and his ankle looked fine. He played fine, but of course that means nothing because the defense wasn't pressing. They weren't trying very hard to use Melvin Gordon right now, even though I think he's going to be good. There's going to be a game here where he gets back in the team's good graces, but you now have permission to sit him and miss his first good game back. Derek Carr, listen. Another game of basically completely clean tape. Good decisions, accurate throws. In my book, that's 2 out of 6 games where that's happened, but honestly, probably 2 more than he had his entire rookie year. So you have to admit, good stuff, like, let's keep seeing it. But of the sophomore quarterbacks, well, really I'm comparing to Blake Bortles. I mean, it's just no comparison. Carr is playing far better than Bortles. Amari Cooper, he really just does change everything. You saw two sides of the same coin with him. First, the highlight reel catch on a jump ball in the second quarter where it's like, I think I'll just jump over you and take that away. And then a bubble screen he takes to the house. Listen, Michael Crabtree having a nice bounce back. He gets targets, even a few deep shots, but Cooper, man. Realize, though, that the Raiders get the Jets in Week 8. And the other blowout, oh boy, it was Texans and Dolphins, 42-0 at the half, 42-0. So let's say, Dolphins, 2 huge romps in 2 games with their new coach, albeit against 2 crummy opponents, and Thursday night the opponent is the Patriots, who aren't crummy. So you do wonder how much we can really apply in terms of lessons when Miami plays actual teams, but since we can't really judge that, let's say what we see. In these games, you can only play the opponent they scheduled you against, and both offensive and defensive lines have just dominated. The offensive line blew the Texans out, just pushed them all over, and obviously Lamar Miller just exploded as a result. And after a month of no pressure, now Cameron Wake is on fire. He's everywhere. Sue had a couple of sacks. It'll be really interesting to see this defense go against a makeshift New England offensive line. They're certainly not that attractive as a fantasy unit facing Brady on Thursday, but otherwise it feels like we are back to the point where they're a very legit streamer, and, after week 8, I would be thinking about streaming them. Rashard Matthews makes an easy catch on a little post, and the Texan safety decides, I don't so much feel like tackling. Boom, home run. Jarvis Landry gets one of those down the left sideline and then chips in a red zone score later. Ryan Tannehill had an NFL record, 25 straight completions. Some of that is about a Texans defense that didn't have Kareem Jackson and just sort of wilted, but definitely some of it is about Miami getting back to what they are, which is that pure West Coast offense. And you don't need great big receivers for that, and possession guys will do. And if the defense isn't going to tackle you, you're going to make some big plays. Unfortunately for fantasy owners, surprisingly to me, DeAndre Hopkins could not do anything in garbage time. Nate Washington benefited from that half plus of garbage time, but unfortunately Hopkins couldn't. And, you'd have to believe there are more of these landmine games lurking for Hopkins with this team and these quarterbacks. I'm not going to be shocked if he has more down weeks as we go along, but the difference is he's shown it to us enough times already in this offense with these quarterbacks that, we don't have a choice. You play him, you don't think about it, and you just hope that you don't need the points the week where he stinks like this. So as for Arian Foster's season-ending injury, Sig Bloom is going to be on here on this show in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about waiver ads this week. I'll say this, and I'll mention it again in a few minutes. Chris Polk actually was the first guy off the bench, but that may have been because Alfred Blue, still recovering from a toe injury that cost him week 6. Polk had his spotlight moment in week 2 with 16 touches. Blue had his in week 3 with 31 touches. Does the fact that Polk was number 2 in this game mean anything going forward? I wish I knew.
Film Room Surprise.
For the second half of Bills Jags, I was answering your questions live on our Film Don't Lie streaming video show. So I didn't see what happened until I watched the tape. I heard, but I didn't actually get to see it with my own eyes. And you know what? I went in hoping to find a metaphor for the human condition. I didn't really, but let's just say I did. Lo and behold, at 7:29 of the third quarter, I found one in the personage of Toby Gerhart, whom I now propose we nickname Mr. Death, because as the grave is inexorable for all of us, as you and I and everyone we know will vanish from the earth without a trace, so Toby Gerhart was not getting into the end zone from the Bills 1. Not that the Jags weren't insistent that Mr. Death could find his sunny side. 4 straight carries from the 1. I didn't know until I watched the tape. How could I have known? But then I watched the tape, and Mr. Death put his icy fingers around my wrist and said, "You too." That was not the only Sisyphean thing about this game. Oh, man, the steaming pile of incompetence was breathtaking. These have to be the worst 2 quarterbacks in the league. Except I guess E.J. Manuel technically isn't the starter, but my God, they stink. They stink so badly. Blake Bortles, it's over, kid. The inaccuracy. Ugh. And both of them, the passes thrown 10 yards away from their intended targets. I don't even know how you do that. Are they closing their eyes? That would seem to be kind of a coachable point, if Bortles and Manuel are both closing their eyes when they throw. I'm not denying that each guy made a nice throw or two, but there's so much poop in between. It's a river of poop. You got 2 very good running backs here, McCoy and Yeldon. I actually didn't realize that in the middle of making a brilliant catch and run Sunday, LaShawn McCoy fumbled at the Jacksonville 1. Brutal for fantasy owners. But again, such a good player. He's worth starting every week. And Yeldon, listen, it's why we watch tape. I came into the season with preconceived notions. I was wrong. Really good stuff. Finally, speaking of wrong, I know we can't put this to bed, but I would love to put this to bed. This idea that the Bills' defense is good at taking away number 1 receivers. You shouldn't play the number 1 receiver. Play the number 2 and 3. That's box score, people. That's Excel work. It's not how football works or football analysis works. Tell me why. Tell me why you think the stats have worked out like that. Isn't it possible it's just a small sample size? After all, it's possible to roll a die 3 times and come up with the same number 3 times in a row, right? I mean, do the Bills have a lockdown corner who always follows the number 1 guy? No. Do the Bills always scheme to the side of the supposed number 1? No. Not starting Allen Robinson because the Bills are good against number 1 receivers. It's just so dumb. I'm not saying it's impossible for a defense to be good at that if they got the right personnel, if they always play the same way. But like I said, today's NFL just isn't the way things work. Yet another piece of the box score you should feel free to ignore completely. And lastly, I got Browns-Rams for you, and I didn't save it for last because it was the worst game of the week, because it wasn't, but rather because we've got this song submission from Dove Goldstein.
His name is Crowell. He's falling in production, good for a spell. Losing snaps to Duke Johnson won't take me far. In half PPR, I'm keeping him on my bench. I can't get rid of that stench about him, 'cause he's just a Cleveland trash bag, baby. He's just a Cleveland trash bag, baby. Start him and buy my getting, maybe what you.
Awesome. Poor Isaiah Crowell. It's so true. Thank you, Dove. We do have to ask ourselves how much fantasy-relevant info came out of Browns-Rams. Or if the tape changed our opinions on anything. You don't need me to tell you how good Todd Gurley is. He's so good. The acceleration and power and change of direction. He's faster than you. He's stronger than you. He's more elusive than you. He's unrestrainable. I know some of you were thinking this might be a time for Brian Quick to emerge coming out of the Rams bye, but he did nothing. Almost caught a long pass. Would have been called back anyway for holding. And then Kenny Britt was the one who made the big pass play in the game. With Nick Foles, I think just forget all the Rams receivers. Meanwhile, the Devontae Freeman of tight ends, also known as Gary Barnidge, he failed to get in the end zone just like Freeman did in Week 7, and thus is a total fantasy bust. Just kidding. He had 101 yards. He's still awesome in that he's really not awesome. He just keeps producing like he's awesome, which is awesome. Travis Benjamin, frustrating game. He had an amazing catch called back by a penalty. He fumbled after taking a huge hit late. I think this is the life of a small number 1 receiver, especially on a not very good team. My preference for Benji is, rosterable, startable in deeper leagues, but I'd prefer he was more of a bye-week fill-in because his circumstances and, his stature probably figure to make him a little bit up and down. Really, other than Barnidge, who's amazing, there's just not much to see once again in something that's, not a very good offense in Cleveland.
Today's guest.
And today's guest, he's our friend. He's back for a third visit. He is Sigmund Bloom. You can find him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. He has the Audible podcast, I Was Just On for an Hour on the Couch. He is a Football Guys contributor. He is the man. How are you, Sig?
Good, and I wonder how many of your wonderful listeners would enjoy our talk about the films of the two Andersons before we went on the air. That's coming soon to the new Chris Harris podcast, Chris Harris on Film.
Yeah, people have been trying to get me to do like a film and music podcast, but I have a feeling like 100 people will listen to that. And
100? That sounds great. We always joke that we're going to have 170 5 or more. Like the celebrity gossip podcast, the music podcast. Cecil can do the rodeo podcast. Anyway.
I'll totally be on the rodeo podcast. I know my rodeo. I do not know my rodeo. All right, so I've finished the film review for week 7, and folks have heard my take on all the games, and so now we're turning our attention to week 8 and beyond, and that makes it time to talk waiver wire. But before we do, I thought I would ask you a sort of non-waiver type question about Dez Bryant. So, Dez Bryant, we saw the video of him working out before the game and looking like he could have almost played in week 7. So it feels like his return is fairly imminent, although with that injury you don't know. And my question is just sort of your opinion about what fantasy owners should be doing with him. Is he maybe actually a sell high, even if he's coming back week 8 against Seattle? Because, we're going to get 4 games of him with Matt Castle?
True. I don't think he's a sell high at this point because you've already absorbed a lot of the cost of him not being able to contribute to your team. I'm getting questions, people that lost Arian Foster, like, should I trade Dez Bryant for TJ Yeldon and things like that? And I think that we always want to tell ourselves a story. How could we win the title? Is TJ Yeldon going to help you win a title? Probably not. I would rather hold on to Dez Bryant and try to rub 2 sticks together, like we're going to talk about, on the waiver wire to fill that running back spot. I think the value that Dez Bryant can add to your lineup, even with Matt Castle, because here's the thing about Matt Castle. Unlike Brandon Whedon, as I'm sure your film review revealed, he's taking some shots. Castle actually threw some balls into some very small windows and gave players chances to make plays at the sideline or in the corner of the end zone, and they did. So Castle has got a little more nerve throwing downfield. And then Dez Bryant is just one of those players who has a gravitational pull when he's out on the field. So I have no doubt that Dez Bryant with Matt Castle can return at least roughly the value. If you average out expectations performance divided by expectations for Martavis Bryant and Antonio Brown, I know that's not going to make you that excited, but I think you're still going to get like 75% of Dez Bryant with Matt Castle, if not a little bit more. And then it's the closeout. It's the closeout into the playoffs. And the thing is, if you traded for him, he is your number 2 or number 3 wide receiver. So I think that I can much easier tell myself a story of how Dez Bryant can help you win a title than whatever I can get for Dez Bryant right now. Unless your team is 2-5 and just hemorrhaging losses, hemorrhaging points because you lost Foster, you lost Charles, you have to do something. It's a desperation move if you're trading him right now.
I think I totally agree, and the end game is what I'm most interested in, is like the moment when the Cowboys get everybody back, you would think they would be back to being pretty darn good offense. So speaking of the Cowboys, for our waiver segment, we typically only mention players available in fewer than 1/3 of Yahoo leagues, and Darren McFadden is owned in 36%. So he didn't make my list. If he made your list, it's fine, close enough. Is it safe to say if DMC isn't number 1 on your list that he would have been number 1 if he'd been eligible?
Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes you have to just don't overthink this. I know injuries. I know all the different things with McFadden, but you saw what he did. This is the player they've been looking for. Sadly, not Kristen Michael. But hey, that puts, if Joseph Randle misses time, Kristen Michael, who also is above 33%, probably, maybe not for long. But now he's a Darren McFadden injury away. So I'm just going to keep coming back to this. But we see the Dallas running game blossoming now. You see Darren McFadden running. Really, he's had a year and a half of his career where he was a fantasy stud. He looked like that guy. And sometimes players need what I call career near-death experience, where you have to be out on the market and peddling your services and seeing how you're seen. That's why they call it prove-it deals, right? Giving some players, when they get a chance to prove it, like McFadden did last week, they take that and they seize it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question. Anybody who would say McFadden's not the number 1 waiver out of the week isn't paying attention. Do I think it's going to end in tragedy? Of course I do. It's not going to go well eventually, but for as long as it goes well, you want a piece of it. All right, so let's do our countdown. This is what we do every week. We go 5 through 1 of our favorite waiver ads of the week of anybody who's owned in fewer than 1/3 of Yahoo leagues. Sig, who's your number 5 this week?
Nate Washington. So, I said 3-4 weeks into the season, the Texans aren't going to throw 50 times a week. I take that back. I take it all back.
Especially no Foster, yeah.
Right. And Cecil Shorts is very good, but he's already suffered 2 pretty serious injuries this year, and that matches his history. We saw what Nate Washington did in garbage time. Brian Mallett and all that controversy. I would expect teams, this is where we get into assumption of rational coaching, do punt gunner kind of coverage on DeAndre Hopkins. Make somebody other than DeAndre Hopkins beat you. That somebody last week in garbage time was Nate Washington, and I see that continuing. And I could see having him number one if you're set at running back and you need a wide receiver. You get into comparative positional value here, and wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends generally have a greater supply on the waiver wire than running back. So that's why he's number 5. But if you need a wide receiver, I'd put him number 1.
So my number 5 is a different wide receiver, but Washington was an honorable mention for me. I have Robert Woods at number 5. The Bills are off in Week 8, so you're not going to get anything from him this week. But, there's no guarantee that Sammy Watkins is going to be back. It didn't look like a very good injury in Week 6. And Percy Harvin, we really don't think he's going to be back. If Tyrod Taylor does come back, Woods has the kind of upside that he showed in London on Sunday, 84 yards and a touchdown, so 5% owned in Yahoo leagues. I am just fine with thinking of him as maybe a speculative ad, not going to immediately help you, but if he's the number 1 receiver for Tyrod Taylor, I think there's some value there. Who would your number 4 be, Sig?
I'd struggle with this, but due diligence, Alfred Blue. And number 3, I'm going to preview spoiler. We're gonna get to the two Texans backs here who have roughly similar. It's hard to separate them. I'm not excited about either of these guys.
So you have Chris Polk above Alfred Blue though in the order of preference.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
That's interesting. Tell me why.
Because Polk is the pass-catching back, passing down back, and as we just discussed, the Texans are not going to be nursing many leads. This is the thing about Alfred Blue. Like last year, he had a game where he broke the Texans' record for carries in a game. I think he had like 36 carries in a game because they were beating up on, I think, the Browns. And they're not going to be beating – the defense is adrift. Romeo Crennel's defense is basically like the electric football. Like they just vibrate and move in a direction. So – there's not if the defense was last year's defense, then I'd say, yeah, maybe we're going to get some because, hey, the schedule, AFC South, come on. But even against AFC South opponents, I don't see the Texans. And the other thing is that this franchise is in a disaster dumpster fire. Somebody said on my Twitter feed that the AFC South are 4 dumpsters in various stages of fire. That's very, very, very apt description there. So I just don't see any way that Alfred Blue is going to get those game scripts. That being said, he's going to probably still get 12 or 15 carries, and you have seen him get in a groove. And, there might be a game or two that J.J. Watt plays wrecking ball or something like that. So, again, it's due diligence. But if you have like 3 or 4 running backs that you're okay with, I wouldn't bother with the Texans running backs. I would look elsewhere. These are your Band-Aids if you need a running back Band-Aid.
Yeah, agreed. I would probably order them Blue than Polk, and the reason I am a little suspicious of Polk is that A, I'm not sure he's any good, and then B, Jonathan Grimes might be a better pass-catching back.
True.
And I would worry that he might get phased out in that way. We might have some clarity in the next week or two on the roles in that backfield. By the same token, it's almost certainly some kind of committee, and that's why I combined Blue and Polk into my number 4. I'm with you. If you're in need of immediate help, the Arian Foster owner in a deeper league who just doesn't have a lot of running back possibility, right? Availability. You're going to have to grab one of these guys and just hope. But hopefully you're in a situation where you don't need such things. But yeah, I cheated because I cheat on these things all the time. Cool. I put Blue and Polk in the same, so I could get to more names. It's all for the kids. I do it for the kids.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Who's your number 3?
Yeah, so good. So now.
Oh, that you have Chris Polk. That's right.
Well,
so
no, but this is good. No, but I'll jump ahead here.
Yeah.
I'm just I'll call an audible and call some attention to somebody that we hadn't discussed. I'll go ahead and throw Thomas Rawls out there. And this will be a shift. And I'm picking him in the moment here, but I think I'm picking him to illustrate a concept, and my number 1 and number 2 will definitely illustrate this. So on one end of the spectrum we have the running back Band-Aids, okay? On the other end of the spectrum we have the if this happens jackpot running backs. And I think that unless you're dying at running back, and this is a process I go through every year, where once we get past the peak of the bye-week gauntlet, and now you're starting to look towards the second half of the season, you're not making moves just to fill your lineup or to cover for a bad configuration of buys and injuries, then you want the highest possible outcomes. And with Thomas Rawls, and I know it's all, we've sounded the all clear sign. We're back to DEFCON 5 with Marshawn Lynch, which makes me happy because I'm a big fan, I own him a lot and so on. But we know that Rawls can play. We know that Seattle's running game has come into full focus now. And we know that Marshawn Lynch struggled with a couple of injuries earlier. He's still at that tail end of his career arc. So, next week against Dallas or at any given week, Marshawn Lynch limps off the field, all of a sudden Thomas Rawls is a borderline running back one. So I much prefer stocking my bench at this point with running backs. Not that, hey, if I had to, they can get 10 or 12 touches in a game. I want running backs that if one thing breaks their way, this is like getting back to the Kristen Michael talk, then you've really got something. This is my focus on my bench and on the waiver wire in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy. In a 10-team league, let's say, it's harder to do that. Bench spots are, at a little more of a premium. But in a deeper league, absolutely, and especially when the bye weeks stop hitting us so hard, when bench spots are a little less urgently to be found. My number 3 is Danny Amendola. 13% of Yahoo leagues. Didn't do anything the first month of the season. The last 2 have been fine. I freely admit that it's likely to be some kind of typical Patriot muddle among a position. Instead of running back, it'll be wide receiver. Brandon LaFell is back. It's not like Julian Edelman's going anywhere, and, Darrelle Revis was certainly on him a fair amount this past week, which might explain some of Amendola's production. But, I don't think it's ever a bad play to try to ride Tom Brady's hot receiver, and right now that hot receiver is Danny Amendola. You have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think you described well the maze we have to go through with the number of targets there. But the larger point that you made about momentum is so important because we use our intellect and our experience and information to try to talk ourselves out of these guys. This goes back to the Darren McFadden take, Just watch just accept it. Don't try to argue with reality. Danny Amendola is playing the best football of the last 4 or 5 years. I think he's over the myriad of injuries he's had. Pat Thorman from PFF pointed out he's played in 36 straight games. So all that stuff, all that punchline stuff about Danny Amendola, that's behind us. And he's making plays to win games. He did it in the Buffalo game. And when you watch the game last week, the Patriots had to earn everything. There were no big coverage breakdowns and things where they exploited getting the Jets flummoxed. I mean, they had to, as much as you grind it out with a passing game, that's what they did. And a lot of that was Danny Amendola making catches where he was getting belted after he makes the catch, bouncing back up, climbing the ladder. Chris, I said, it looks like he's learned parkour off of invisible walls or something.
He's just training with Edelman in that Puma commercial.
It's crazy. But he's making these plays. And like you said, Brady's not stupid. Brady's going to keep going to the guy who always makes the play whenever he's giving him a chance. And the other thing is Amendola, as I said, last week, because it's the Jets, there was a lot of shorter passing. But you saw him getting downfield receptions, and he can play inside and outside. He's not Wes Welker. He can play inside and outside, and he can make those plays on balls he has to compete for. Again, not something – because going all the way back, it's funny. I remember we covered Amendola for our show for Draft Guys TV, and we said, no, seriously, he's Texas Tech. He's the same dimensions. He's the same kind of quickness. He really is the next Wes Welker. But he's actually become, and I think the Patriots saw this whenever they decided between Welker and Amendola, or they gave Welker like a lowball deal. They said, we'll give you 2 years, $10 million, that's our best offer. And meanwhile, they signed Amendola, and it wasn't an either or. They would have been happy to keep both. But I think they recognize that Amendola, healthy, is Welker and maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he has been wildly disappointing at times. And so, maybe related to groin injuries, because, I'm a Pats fan, and I approach Amendola with a healthy dose of skepticism, but I also don't want to bet into a winning streak. Who's number 2 for you?
Kyrie Robinson.
Me too.
Yeah, that's right. High five, daps. This fits into so these last 2 give you that if. And Mark Ingram has not exactly been the most durable over the course of his career. But I would not say, by the way, I get a few questions like this. Should I trade Mark Ingram before he gets hurt? Don't play that game. I mean, if a guy's contributing, this is like the Darren McFadden thing, Now, that being said, if you can pick up McFadden this week and he becomes your 4th running back, or your 3rd running back behind 2 rock-solid guys, Doug Martin and Le'Veon Bell or something, then sure, use McFadden to upgrade your lineup. And that's the question, like, who should I trade McFadden for? Does your lineup look better in a very clear, significant way after? Then you trade him. But I wouldn't be trying to time injuries. So Kyrie Robinson, he's already getting goal line carries. So what you add from, say, someone like Thomas Rawls is you could throw Kyrie Robinson in, and he might get a touchdown or two like he did last week. He's good, and they're still using him, and they've been using him pretty consistently around the goal line. But then you have the possibility of the Mark Ingram injury. And behind the scenes here, the Saints are kind of coming together as a team on defense and on offense. We looked at them as maybe one of the worst teams in the league in the first 4 or 5 weeks. But now there's some fertile soil there. And last week they scored, 27 against the Colts, but that was because they took the foot off the gas. And maybe their defense getting better is not great for the fantasy value of their offense. But I still think they're one of the worst defenses in the league. And that's going to create even more scoring opportunities as they're going to keep the offense opened up. The NFC South schedule is wonderful. So Kyrie Robinson is a player that can be a league winner if Ingram goes down.
He is, here's to you, Kyrie Robinson. He is often discussed, one of my favorite players. Cousin Josh and I mention him frequently, and I think I know who your number one is. Go ahead.
Charles Sims.
Not my number one. He's an honorable mention for me. Go ahead on Charles Sims.
It's a very similar picture to Kyrie Robinson. There's a little flip here where I think there's probably more of a chance, although we're speculating, I'm kind of just totally making this up because I don't really think you can predict injuries. I would say that just based on injury history, Ingram is probably more likely to miss time than Doug Martin. But the Tampa running game, man, George Warhop, I want to get that name out there because the Tampa offensive line, we went into this season thinking, well, Winston, et cetera, are going to have to overcome that offensive line. No. They're pushing people around. The holes they were opening for Doug Martin and Charles Sims last week and the pockets they were creating for Jameis Winston. I know it was Washington, but still, it's NFL defense. This Tampa running game is really coming into focus now. And you have the downfield passing threat of Winston to Evans to keep defenses honest. They're going to have Austin Seferian-Jenkins back. Sims, a great receiver out of the backfield. And Jameis Winston is a smart football player. He knows where his checkdowns are. Often it is Sims on passing downs. And Sims is displaying some speed, some giddy up to his game that I didn't see at West Virginia. Maybe it was there earlier at Houston, but I didn't see it on his West Virginia tape. So Sims, like Kyrie Robinson, you can plug him in any given week. He had a 43-yard run, I think, called back last week. He almost had 100 total yards last week, and that's playing second fiddle to Doug Martin. So in any given week, if you have to plug Charles Sims in, he could come through for you. Again, the NFC South schedule also helps you here. But if Doug Martin goes down, you've got a legitimate 3-down back in a vibrant offense. Not only is he an instant running back one, he might be at the top 6, top 8, not even a season changer. I mean, this could be a guy that if he gets all of the work in this backfield, the sky's the limit.
You are overselling Tampa's offense right now.
Look at the schedule.
You're excited by what you just saw. I just think Washington is so banged up on defense. That offensive line was mauling them, but I was kind of me playing nose tackle, which isn't good.
It's true, but who out of Atlanta, Giants, Dallas, Philly, Indy, Atlanta, New Orleans, St. Louis in week 15, Chicago, who of these teams are you scared of on defense?
I've seen Tampa not be able to run against pretty much every other team up until the last 2 weeks. So,
it's coming. It's definitely something that at the beginning of the season, I would never ever expected this.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I think Charles Sims is an interesting play for sure. He was an honorable mention. I thought you were going to say Theo Riddick. He'd be my number one. Played 28 snaps Sunday compared to 10 for Joique Bell and 11 for Amir Abdullah. And, of course, that's game flow related, but you know what the Lions are going to be doing a lot this year? Losing.
Right.
And, a PPR league, I think Riddick it's criminal that he's not owned more. I think he still leads all NFL running backs in receptions. Yeah. And even in the standard league, he's playing so much and he's getting carries. He got a couple red zone carries last week. Clearly, I don't love the Lions' offensive line situation, but if there's one constant there, it's been Riddick. Do you have a theory about what the new offense is going to wind up looking like now that they've fired the offensive coordinator?
No. I don't think we should look for a revelatory transformation like we saw in Miami. Maybe if Jim Caldwell gets left in London. And I think there's a shot across the bow to Caldwell, by the way. Caldwell just said earlier this week, no one's going to get fired. Yeah, well, nobody gave you the memo, but that's because you're not in that meeting.
Right, well, it's not like any coach ever gets fired after the London game.
I know. It's like in hindsight, this has been a really interesting twist to add to the NFL calendar. The way the London game, it's like I said, they just leave you in London. Sorry, your passport has been revoked.
Put you on the ice flow.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect. Someone out there make an image of that because that's perfect. And that's kind of how our fantasy teams feel if we were counting on Amir Abdullah. So I don't know. I have to say I have to do some homework on Jim Bob Cooter, and I also just love to say Jim Bob Cooter. I want to say one more time, Jim Bob Cooter.
You are in Texas after all.
Exactly. And so I don't know. He is going to be the play caller, not Caldwell. That was a big confetti moment. Like, yay.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what direction they're going to go here. I think that if there is a running back that has earned trust, it is Theo Riddick. And he's looked better running inside than Amir Abdullah. But I have no idea what Cooter thinks of Abdullah versus Riddick versus George Wynn, who inexplicably got goal line carries. This is a riddle. Whereas with Miami, you could say, I know what they should do. I know they need to go to Lamar Miller. I know Lamar Miller is an ascendant talent, and they just got things back to being simple. We could look back. Now, if Theo Riddick continues to have that kind of role and we get more rational coaching and play calling and sequencing and just the placebo effect of we made a change, now we can put everything that happened up to this point behind us and start anew. The problem is that offensive line. I mean,
it's not good. No question about it. Do you think Jim Bob Cooter talks like Roscoe P. Coltrane?
Well, I think that knowing that he was going into a coaching career and keeping the name Jim Bob Cooter, he was prepared for that. So I look forward to it, and I think that as I was always a fan of the watch on ESPN used to be a little more irreverent when there'd always be like the Dick Trickle and Ron Tugnut watch and things like that. It doesn't always have to be so serious. So I just like saying Jim Bob Cooter, and hey, Jim Bob Cooter might be somebody we build statues to if we own Riddick or Abdullah or Stafford or Calvin Johnson.
Roscoe P. Coltrane. All right, so for your number one and number two, I mean, it feels to me like your one and your two are, these Kai Robinson, Charles Sims types who are interesting to roster right now. You're stashing and you're only using in an emergency until and if they get the lead job. If you had a $200 fab budget, it doesn't sound like you're willing to spend a ton for those guys. What do you think the right dollar neighborhood would be?
30 to $60, 15 to 30%. And that's low because I do the waiver wire report for football guys, and I assign percentages. I assign percentages more to be comparative within a position and across positions for prioritizing players. Y'all out there know the wagering of your dollars on, winning these guys, bidding on these guys, what bids, where the sweet spots are and things like that. But now that we're to week 8, the threshold for someone to say just spend everything you have left gets lower and lower. Like McFadden is pretty much one of those guys, So only saying 30 to $60 at this point means these are interchangeable. Maybe next week you might swap them out maybe for D'Angelo Williams if we see Le'Veon Bell, have a little trouble, because that's what we're going to be watching. So really, when we back, it's all about backup running backs down the stretch for a couple of reasons. One is just the rate of running back injuries and how running back, unlike other positions, is really a plug and play position in certain situations. And then the other thing is we see it like Orleans Darkwa, who we did not mention, who should be somebody you're looking at for waiver, the fresh legs factor. Sometimes just that a running back hasn't been getting pounded for 2 or 3 months, and he's going up against defenses that have been, can be all the difference. We see it every year. Running backs that we never contemplated having a big difference end up mattering in the fantasy playoffs. So you're going to always try to maximize the triangle of the talent of the running back, the quality of the situation, and the potential for opportunity. And that potential for opportunity is the one that can be variable depending on what we observe with injuries, or perhaps changes of plans, teams going into buys and out of buys, coaching changes. That's why Theo Riddick, I think, is a good guy to put the spotlight on, or Amir Abdullah as people start to drop him out of frustration. Because if we can say there's a chance, there's a step that this player, if we get that step, their value is going to blossom. Then those are the guys you want on the bench. You don't want to be scrambling to get them after the value blossoms. It's too late.
I hear you. Just because I know the listeners sometimes would like me to say a few deeper league names in case, a lot of the guys we mentioned are old. I am going to mention Orleans Darkwa. He's on my list for deeper league. Jonathan Grimes, I mentioned, I think in a deep league, he's addable as a speculative kind of guy. Chris Thompson, don't want to forget about him in Washington during their bye. Matt Jones played a lot this week, but I think it would have been Chris Thompson's snaps if he'd been healthy as they trailed. And Marquise Wilson, don't forget that the Bears are back, and Eddie Royal hasn't done much, so Marquise Wilson's a possibility too. Hey, Sig, this was great. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm glad I haven't scared you off yet. You keep coming back. You can follow Sig on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. Thanks again, man.
Always a great pleasure. Look forward to the next chance.
And that's our show. Again, thanks so much for listening. If you're interested in Harris Football merch, including a few hilarious t-shirt designs made by fellow listeners, go to harrisfootball.com and click merch. Every cent of profit will go to the ASPCA and the ALS Foundation. Not looking to make money off it, just another way for us to feel connected to each other with our silly inside jokes and our no diggities and duck hands and all that. Coming Wednesday, we'll be talking Week 8 ranks with Brandon Funston from Yahoo. So subscribe to the podcast now and you'll never miss an episode. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.